So again, briefly about me, because there's so little time. I really work basically in every kind of setting. So I work from human, from clinical work, I work with machines, I work in the environment, I work in cosmic and space, and I work with collectives. The research that I'm going to show you today, because I think it fits the best, is the one that I did at the German Aerospace Center, where I was researching sonification in air traffic control for 3.5 years. The little yellow thingy is the building where I was working. We had our own air traffic control center and planes and so on. So that was very nice. Another thing is, I have to stop the playing. So here's what we're going to talk today about. So what I did was, or what my life's work is figuring out if there's an intersection between arts and science. I specifically don't call it art and technology, because technology can be in principle even writing language. And often these are intermixed, and I'm not always a fan of that. Yeah, because art and technology is something different than art and science. It's not necessarily the same thing. It's the same thing. So what we did at the German Aerospace Center was asking the question, is there a way to help the why is it constantly moving along? If you can help the air traffic controller find an acoustic environment in which sonification, musical sounds can help them in the future. And so this is not a research that we're doing at the moment. It's really asking the question in like 15, 20 years when air traffic control system will change in the way that at the moment we still have a lot of communication between pilots and air traffic controllers, and AI will take over a lot of that. And so the speaking room is free, and that is the moment when basically air traffic controller can sit anywhere in the world, controlling any kind of setting in the world. And then a question that I get often asked, so Mike, why do we need sounds at all? We can just use language. Yeah, that is a very interesting part of this question. And what I would like for you to do is, while I continue to talk, just count backwards from 10 to 1. So you will see that when I talk and you are thinking in your mind about these numbers that go down, that your concentration is taken further and further away from what I'm saying. It's very difficult for you in the end to really follow my words while you do the counting backwards. And that is one of the key problems. So if you have generally language spoken in any kind of setting and you have to focus on a different kind of language, it becomes a difficult problem. And so that's what we call the irrelevant speech effect, meaning that there are different layers of speech interacting with each other. And so we don't have that problem when we just use sounds. So that is one of the reasons why we don't do that. Another problem that we had, and that really is also connected to what you were saying, how can I work with engineers who usually don't have necessarily a musical background? And how can I create a setting in which the air traffic controller or the engineers feel inspired to work with me, rather than just saying, oh, there's a keyword and now I have to do some weird stuff on the keyboard. And so I developed several different things. So we developed different kind of MIDI controllers that you can see on the left side here, which was the idea that an air traffic controller, an engineer, can just come into my room and we can really create sounds with hands and really interact in a different form with them. And another form of work was also that you can see here on the right side, these tiny pads. It's a very, very simple tool. It's really just small pads, and they have a silver lining that controls just circuits. And then if you push them together, then there's a sound. And the reason why I've done this, because when I was working at BMW, and sometimes I was working with the engineers on the keyboard, after 3 hours, we had no idea anymore what we were talking about. It was really, really, really difficult to remember all of these things. And so with these pads, we could write on them, we could reorganize them, we could put them on a whiteboard, and we would have a structure of everything. And so then after that, you can see it here better now. So if I just put my fingers here, it would create a circuit, and then the circuit would just play a simple sound. And so we could start interacting between the sounds and the flight scenarios. And after we have done this, we realized it would be really cool now to send this all around the world. And so we created also a software, a simple software where I could work, again, with air traffic controllers, thinking about the scenarios and the connection between the sounds. And then we also did, again, what you mentioned, which is really interesting in research, or it becomes more and more interesting and important in research, is the idea of gamifications. Because it helps us to understand the research that we are doing in a different form. Here was, again, quite a simple research idea. We just wanted to figure out how in the future can a human air traffic controller collaborate with an AI. How could that look like? And so we had a student develop a software that was really very, very basic. You would just have these aircrafts on top, and then depending on how many aircrafts you would have, there would be a different kind of time limit, and there could also be danger. Yeah, so there could be a possible danger that there could be stuff happening. I don't know why it's always starting. So then I was asked to introduce the idea, what would happen if you would use addition of sound and music? And so one of the things was that we had 3 layers, which you often have in research, kind of the 3-layer system. And the purpose of the music was not just the soundtrack, but also to kind of enforce the idea of there are different, so why it would, the 3 different elements of sound that would happen, and that the sound would help the test person kind of to hear also where they are within the game. That was the idea. So again, we had these 3 layers. The first was very simple. Everything was going nice. Fluently breaks between. Then we had a next layer who was already showing, okay, there's slowly something happening. If you don't take control of your airspace, there might be danger happening. And the idea that we then had, that we had different test people, and we did a lot of testing, but I don't want to boring you with that. But the idea was really to figure out, was there not only an effect on the gamification itself, but also on the way that we use sounds. And we really figured out that the connection of the gamification in collaboration with the sounds was really helping people to understand the game flow better. Then another thing that I also want to show you, because I really work in all different art fields, is since I don't come from engineering, I had a huge problem of figuring out what does air traffic control actually mean, because it didn't really mean much to me. But dance does. And so I thought maybe there's a connection between having dancers on stage and moving aircrafts. And so I got a group of dancers together, and we just thought about flight scenarios and different interactions to see, would it make any sense to have this collaboration between dancers and moving aircraft. And so one of the other things that we did was what you see here in the cube was when you, again, remember yourself of the air traffic control screen, you have always an aircraft flying through space in some form. And so one of the questions that I had, is there a way that we can specifically point out a sound within that kind of cube? Is there a way? And so another way of thinking of this was also, how could sound be specific within a cube? And so I really did research with dancers all around the world, asked them the simple question, how would you experience a room and the sounds within that room? Yeah, so what would you feel is the sound on the floor, on the ceiling, on the left side, on the right side? So that if you think of these corners, you could put a specific sound in them, and then depending on how far away you are from that corner, the sound could shift. And so there could be specific pinpoints on how that sound works. And now I will show you one of the earliest experiments that we did. So here you see the normal kind of cubic form in a way where we just explored the idea of how can we focus sound within these structures. So each corner has a specific sound. And so it's very simple, but you can imagine that this could be an aircraft. And so the closer you come to a one corner, the stronger the sound gets. Yeah? And so you start to hear the differentiation between the space and where the element is in that space. And that was another very simple experiment that we did to just figure out what is actually a scenario in air traffic control. How can this look like? And here it's really simple. It's just an aircraft flying into a space, flying through that space, and flying out of that space. But why is this interesting? Because I realized that within that space, there are many, many different forms of where I can actually put the sound. Yeah, so I can have a sound before an aircraft reaches into a space. I can have it when it reaches the space, within the space, shortly before it goes out of the space, space exit, and then out of the space. And so again, the question then was, okay, so I have, even in the most simple example of an air traffic control scenario, I have 6 possible ways of scoring that. And now the question was, what actually would we do with that? So this is Dial. This is one of the big projects that we have been doing at the German Aerospace Center. So the idea really is that in 15, 20, 30 years, the air traffic controller basically sits in a room alone and really handles most of the things by himself. There's rarely any interconnection with pilots because all of that is done through a kind of interconnection with the software itself. So the software is talking between the air traffic controller and the pilot. And in that way, you're basically just an operator. And for that, we were thinking, okay, now that would be the interesting part to introduce sound. And so we created these long, long sheets of me trying to understand what possible scenarios could you have and how could that look like. And so again, I like to do this very systematically so that we really understand how things are working. So I collected with air traffic controllers and engineers idea of what could actually be interesting to be scored. What could we actually do in that space? And then I was giving out sheets and we were really trying to figure out what could be the best scenarios. And then from that form of scenarios, we usually choose around 3 to 5. At BMW, it's around 10 to 15 different scenarios that we then usually have to score or to change. And then we do the same thing. So for example, at BMW, for 12 sounds, I worked basically 1 year to figure out how they work. Yeah, so each sound has different sound families, how we call them. That means, for example, in a simple way, imagine if your gas tank is slowly getting to an end, there's a sound. Yeah, and so I have to think about how is that sound created and what does it mean? And is it just going up or is it going down or how is it structured? And so I create again many, many different sounds for the same scenario to just figure out in detail how can we communicate that. And with that comes another important part that is usually not done when it's just arts or when it's just music, is the idea of how can we actually teach musical symbolism? How can we teach people these sounds that we have created? And so again, I wanted that the sounds that the air traffic controllers get are not just done when they get into the actual research stage. They had to listen to them before that. That's very interesting. So I created these slides with the team that the air traffic controllers would get like 2 weeks ahead so they could really listen to them. So the idea is that it really gets into their unconsciousness and becomes like this one. Yeah, and so we created these slides that they could listen to so that when they come to us for the testing, they already know that. So I will show you just a couple of these sounds. One is this, yeah, which just basically means there's an aircraft that reached the space. And here's another one that means it's changing the course. And what you already might find different, so my dream version was always that the sonification of air traffic control data or data in general is a different form of a film score. Most of the interactions that you probably have with sounds are very brief. Yeah, when you have your computer, you have your machines, most of the times they just make beep beep or just make beep or your car sounds just give you short interpretations of what's going on. But my dream vision is that there's an ongoing kind of a film score going on that is really much more like the soundtrack that you would have in a ship motor. Yeah? When you work as an engineer in a ship and you have your machines, you can listen to the machines, and while you listen to them, you can hear, are they working or not? And that is actually the idea that I wanted. So the sound that you just heard, it was longer, was already very challenging for the engineers and the air traffic controllers. But it was the dream vision that I want to go away from short alerts to longer scored sounds. And then we had just this one sound. Yeah. So this is how it then looked like. Usually when we do our research at the German Aerospace Center, you have real air traffic controllers. You have a team of psychologists, of many other researchers, of many other people involved in the whole process. And they usually have, like in our kind of aerospace, normally a lot of software is tested at the same time. Yeah, so it's not just my sonification that is tested, but it's like 7, 8, 9 other forms of software. And they always have 2 runs. The first run always is the idea of just do it as we are doing it now. And the second run is they're working with the software. And then usually it's a psychologist sitting next to them or behind them and seeing how are they interacting with the software, how are they learning the software, how are they engaging with the software, and also are they overwhelmed or not. Yeah, so we usually want that they're in a kind of middle path. We don't want them to be too overwhelmed, but we also don't want them to be bored. So that's all the things that we are testing there. And here are some of the just quick results. So we did the very first study then with sonification, which was really quite successful, figuring out how sounds work, that they do like the idea of situational awareness, meaning they like especially to hear sounds when they can see something within the screen or how that would interact with them. And so that was very cool. And that is kind of my dream vision. I know it's kind of weird and probably strange, but the idea would be that you have these air traffic control centers and there's really sound as a very important part that would inform you what is going on within that world. Now, as the last thing, to just give you a small other viewpoint, this is a project that we have done 3 years ago with 2 mathematicians, professors from Luxembourg University, and the idea was, can we sonify lines and curves, and how could that work, look like, and sound like? And that's it.